welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take information you need, pull out the crucial bits, fast and deep. Think of it as your shortcut to getting really informed. Today, we're diving into some really interesting material you sent over. Excerpts from Cortisol Detox Diet Cookbook for Women by Florence Smith.
Yeah, and our mission really is to get a handle on the core ideas Smith presents. Things like diet, stress, hormones, weight management, and maybe even think about how a really effective podcast on this stuff might tackle the content, to really connect with listeners.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. A cookbook focused on cortisol detox. Sounds like there's more going on than just recipes. What's the main tension around cortisol the book brings up?
Well, the book starts by pointing out how vital cortisol is. I mean, it's that kick that helps us in stressful moments, regulates metabolism, our sleep cycle. But the real issue Smith focuses on is how, in modern life, levels often get stuck high, chronically elevated. And this hormone, meant for short bursts, stays high. This seems to particularly affect women.
So it's not that cortisol itself is bad, it's the constant high level that's the issue. What kind of specific effects does the book say this has, especially on women?
Exactly. It's fascinating, this dual nature, right? Essential for acute stress, but really damaging when it's chronically high. For women, yeah, sustained high levels can really mess things up. Smith details how it can disrupt reproductive hormones, possibly leading to irregular cycles, maybe fertility issues, and making things like menopause and perimenopause symptoms worse. And then there's the weight impact, big time,
Yeah.
often leading to gain, especially that really stubborn belly fat.
Right, I heard about that connection.
Yeah, and sleep is another huge one. Trouble falling asleep, staying asleep. And the mental health side, too. Anxiety, depression, irritability, it can all be linked. It can even weaken the immune system over time. And interestingly, some research suggests the type of fat stored due to cortisol might be more metabolically active, potentially causing even more hormonal imbalance.
Right.
Which really underlines why tackling the root cause, the stress, is so critical, not just focusing on the weight gain symptom.
That makes total sense. So if you've ever felt caught in that loop, stress, weight gain, poor sleep, this stuff is directly talking to you. Now, the book mentions how stress actually changes our hormones, and weight calls it a silent cycle. What's the initial, trigger? What happens first?
Okay, so the first thing is that stress response, fight or flight. Your body pumps out cortisol, adrenaline, insulin too, gives you that instant energy boost. But these hormonal shifts, they're meant to be quick fixes, temporary. The problem is, with ongoing stress, the body kind of forgets how to switch off, and cortisol just stays elevated.
And that sustained high level kicks off a whole chain reaction, doesn't it?
Precisely. Long-term high cortisol can lead to insulin resistance. Basically, your cells stop responding well to insulin, so blood sugar tends to creep up, and your body gets better at storing fat, especially, again, around the abdomen. Plus, high cortisol often ramps up cravings for high-fat, high-sugar foods, comfort foods.
Stress eating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which just fuels the cycle. And if we look at the bigger picture, it's so clear managing stress isn't just, a mental thing. It has these deep physiological effects. It even impacts reproductive hormones like estrogen and progesterone. This whole interplay is what the book calls the silent cycle, because the symptoms like fatigue, mood swings, maybe small weight changes, they often get dismissed until they become really obvious.
Right, you just think, I'm tired or I'm stressed.
Yeah. And Smith really emphasizes breaking the cycle needs a whole person approach, stress reduction techniques, regular exercise, and crucially, a balanced, nutrient-dense diet.
Okay, so stress is definitely key. But the title does say cookbook. Let's get into the power of food as the book sees it.
Right. The book really highlights the huge influence food choices have on mood, on metabolism, and especially on breaking or reinforcing that stress hormone weight cycle we were just talking about. It contrasts, the bad stuff, unhealthy fats, refined sugars, which can make hormonal imbalances worse, with the good stuff, nutrient-dense foods that help stabilize blood sugar and kind of buffer cortisol's negative effects.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Food as an actual tool to manage stress hormones. How does food do that, according to the book?
Well, several ways. Getting enough protein is key, it says, for making hormones and also for producing those mood regulators in your brain, the neurotransmitters, like serotonin, which helps you feel good. Then you've got fruits and vegetables. They're packed with antioxidants and phytonutrients, these plant compounds that fight oxidative stress. And oxidative stress itself can actually trigger cortisol production.
Okay.
Smith also brings up adaptogens.
Adaptogens, right. We hear that term. Remind us again what they are and what they do here.
Sure. Adaptogens are specifically herbs and roots, things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, holy basil. They've been used traditionally to help the body, well, adapt to stress and regulate cortisol. The book also stresses things like regular, balanced meals and mindful eating. This helps avoid those big blood sugar swings that can trigger cortisol spikes. Oh, and hydration. Staying properly hydrated is apparently vital for hormone production and a healthy stress response generally.
It really sounds like the cookbook's approach is about adding good things in, not just cutting things out. Very proactive. Which brings us to the hormonal harmony diet mentioned. What's the main idea there?
The core concept really is just prioritizing whole, unprocessed foods. Foods rich in nutrients known to support hormonal balance and help you build resilience to stress. It seems less about rigid rules and more about making smart choices that nourish your body and kind of lessen the blow from chronic stress.
Makes sense. And within that diet, the book points out top superfoods. That term gets thrown around a lot. Which specific foods does Florence Smith highlight for helping with cortisol and hormones?
Yeah, she lists quite a few. Avocados, they've got potassium, magnesium, healthy fats, apparently good for blood pressure and cortisol. Dark chocolate, in moderation, of course, for its flavonoids and, mood boosting effects. Oily fish like salmon, big on those anti-inflammatory omega-3s.
Oh,
Leafy greens get a mention for magnesium, which is super important for stress management. Berries for antioxidants, fighting that oxidative stress. Nuts and seeds for omega-3s again, plus magnesium and fiber. Citrus fruits for vitamin C, which might help lower cortisol and support progesterone. Whole grains for B vitamins and magnesium. Legumes great for fiber, blood sugar control, and they have beneficial bioactive compounds. And finally, yogurt and fermented foods for probiotics and supporting gut health.
wow, that's quite a list. And what's fascinating is the idea that these aren't just like generically healthy,
Right.
but have specific ways they influence our hormones. Okay, the book goes deeper into some of these, right? Starting with omega-3s.
Yes, exactly. Omega-3s are framed as really powerful allies against stress and inflammation. You find them in fatty fish, flax seeds, chia seeds, walnuts. These are essential fats our bodies can't make, and they play a big role in dialing down the body's stress response, partly by fighting inflammation, which often follows stress. They're also critical for brain health, supporting neurotransmitters directly impacting mood. And importantly, research suggests omega-3s might actually help lower cortisol secretion when you are stressed.
Huh. So adding more salmon or walnuts could actually make a difference in how we handle stress. That's pretty practical. What about adaptogens? Does the book give more detail there?
It does. Adaptogens, as we said, help the body adapt. These herbs are thought to work by supporting the adrenal system and helping normalize cortisol levels. The book mentions ashwagandha, maybe for anxiety and focus, rhodiola for mental performance and energy, different types of ginseng for energy and immunity, holy basil for normalizing stress processes, and licorice root for adrenal support. But, and this is important, it always stresses consulting a healthcare professional before starting any new supplements. Always a good idea.
Definitely. Good caution. Okay, another thing the book emphasizes is fiber and blood sugar balance. Why is that connection so important for stress and hormones?
Well, fiber, both soluble and insoluble, is really key for slowing down how quickly glucose or sugar gets absorbed into your bloodstream. This helps prevent those sharp spikes and crashes in blood sugar, and those crashes. They can actually trigger cortisol release as your body tries to get things back in balance. So by promoting steady energy levels, fiber helps manage cravings, supports weight management, and helps prevent insulin resistance, which we know is linked to high cortisol. The book suggests aiming for around 25-30 grams a day from things like whole grains, fruits, veggies, legumes.
Okay, so fiber means steady energy, less cortisol surges. Now, flipping the coin, let's talk the truth about sugar and cortisol.
Ah,
Sounds like a bumpier relationship.
that's putting it mildly. Sugar and cortisol. It's a complicated, often pretty damaging cycle. Eating sugary stuff gives you that quick burst, maybe even feels comforting when you're stressed.
Right, the sugar rush.
But it's usually followed by a really fast drop in blood sugar. That sudden drop signals your body to release more cortisol to try and stabilize things. So you get stuck in this vicious cycle of highs and lows, keeping cortisol levels chronically elevated. And over time, this pattern contributes to weight gain, weakens the immune system, increases risk for chronic diseases, and messes with mood and even brain function.
Ugh, that energy roller coaster ends up just adding more stress to the system. Okay, lastly, the book talks about why your gut health matters for hormonal and stress balance. This gut stuff is everywhere now.
Absolutely, and for good reason. The gut is increasingly seen as like mission control for overall well-being, including hormones and stress. It's often called the second brain because it has this huge network of neurons. Your gut microbiome, those trillions of bacteria, can actually influence the production of hormones like serotonin, even how estrogen is metabolized. There's a direct communication line, the gut-brain axis, that heavily influences our stress response. A healthy gut can help regulate cortisol, but gut inflammation, sometimes called leaky gut, can throw hormones off balance and make stress worse.
Wow.
So the book recommends things like probiotics and prebiotics from yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, bananas, onions, garlic, plus reducing inflammatory foods, managing stress itself, and staying hydrated. All for good gut health.
So it really is all connected. Stress hits the gut talks to hormones, and food is right in the middle of it all. Okay, now this whole deep dive started because you were interested in how a successful podcast might cover this kind of stuff effectively. This book, even though it's a cookbook, is packed with info. How could these ideas be turned into really engaging audio? Maybe thinking about a hypothetical podcast like Chapter Crunch, which summarizes books.
That's a great question. How do you take this detailed information and make it, both informative and genuinely engaging for someone just tuning in? Based on what we've pulled from the book, I think a successful podcast like Chapter Crunch, Tackling Health and Wellness, would probably focus on a few key things, similar to what we try to do here, actually.
Like what? What would make that hypothetical Chapter Crunch episode stand out when covering a book like this one?
Okay, first, Riassunti Akatavanti engaging summaries. Just like we've tried to pull out the core ideas for you, a podcast needs to nail the key points concisely and compellingly. So instead of just saying cortisol is the stress hormone, maybe they'd quickly explain its job and then boom, hit you with the problems of it being too high, making it instantly relatable.
Right. Get to the point and make it matter. What else?
Second, insight precision. Practical insights. Listeners need to know how this stuff applies to them. A good podcast gives real-world applications, motivation. So not just listing superfoods, but maybe offering like 2 simple, doable tips for getting them into your day, or easy swaps for unhealthy options, directly echoing the practical side of the cookbook, right?
Yeah, moving beyond the what to the how and why it matters to me makes sense. What else makes audio engaging?
Third, interactivity. You got to keep people engaged in audio. So maybe the podcast poses questions related to the book. Have you noticed stress impacting your food choices? Encourage reflection. Or they could use social media polls tied to the topic, or even ask listeners what other books on hormones or stress they'd want summarized. Make it feel like more of a community.
Yeah, creating that two-way street feel, even though it's audio. And the last key for a strong podcast structure.
Fourth, structura dynamic structure. A clear, well-paced structure is just essential. Maybe a quick, catchy intro to the book's main message, then a summary of the big takeaways, practical tips, maybe even a powerful quote from the book if it fits, and then a clear wrap-up reinforcing the main points. A lot like the structure we've aimed for in this deep dive, actually, to keep things flowing.
So pulling it all together, what does this mean for understanding cortisol and making good podcasts? It really seems like breaking down complexity into digestible, actionable pieces,
Yeah.
actively involving the audience, and having a clear, dynamic flow. Those are winning ingredients in both areas, aren't they?
Exactly. It's really about empowering people, whether it's managing their health or just efficiently soaking up valuable information.
Okay, so to wrap things up then, we've really dug into how stress, especially the chronic kind, messes with our hormones, particularly cortisol, and how that impacts weight and just general well-being. We've looked at the power of food-specific superfoods, adaptogens as actual tools to help manage this. We've touched on why gut health is so critical in this whole balance, and we've explored how these ideas could shape really engaging, valuable content, like a great book summary podcast focusing on practical knowledge and connection. Remember, this deep dive was all about giving you that shortcut to understanding these key concepts.
And maybe just consider how even small, consistent tweaks to your diet and stress management could start a ripple effect for your overall health and hormone balance. What's maybe one tiny step you could take today?
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope you found it insightful and a useful shortcut on this important topic.